We're joined by Howard Evans, who is a director at Chiles Evans Care Architects. CE+CA was founded in 2015 by Howard, Prue Chiles and Leo Kerr. It is an award-winning design-led practice based in Sheffield with an established reputation for their work that reflects their passion, attention to detail and commitment to their ethos. You may have seen a few of their projects because they were featured on the Channel 4's Ugly House to Lovely House. So this year they won RIBA East Midlands Awards 2022, RIBA East Midlands Project Architect of the Year 2022, RIBA East Midlands Sustainability Award 2022, and the project Ravine House was shortlisted for the 2022 Stephen Lawrence Prize and the long list for the RIBA House of the Year 2022, and that's just to name a few. I'll hand over now to Howard.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining the presentation today. As Marium said, I'll be talking a bit about Ravine House, our journey to getting it built, how we got there, and then sort of finally where it leads to in terms of what we're doing next. So I will share screen and hopefully you'll be able to all see that. So Ravine House, I think our journey to Ravine House starts a little bit before that. And the practice was actually founded back in 1999, 2000, and was Prue Chiles Architects. And we were sat predominantly very closely to university, with Prue being practice director, and we started life as a research practice. And through that, we got to work on some brilliant community projects. There was a lot of focus on community-led practice, and we developed a research wing called Bureau of Design Research. And through that, we started to refine what we were interested in. Our very early work was very much guided by what we term these days as sustainable and retrofit. The first projects being extension to school as part of the Classroom as a Future, and Hillsborough Bowling Pavilion. We were doing a lot of research into schools through this period of time as well. And then that led on to kind of a focus on domestic and residential architecture and the kind of idea of domesticity, the patterns of life, and how people live, how we can impact as architects on their life, how we can change the way that people live through simple but careful design. And these are a couple of projects that we did up in Holmfirth, Knitter's House and Underpinned House. And both of those really concerned with turning living on its head, making spaces where, in a sort of slightly unconventional way, but really spaces that were driven by the landscape and view. And I think since then, we've really sort of gone down a route of making beautiful but sustainable architecture. And I suppose it's not, we don't badge ourselves as passive house experts, but it's very much, how do you get the fabric of the building right first? How do you tackle that kind of insulation, windows, and dealing with energy conservation through getting the space right? And that's led on to a few of our other projects, sort of deep retrofit. But we've never sort of forgotten the idea of community-led design either. And so we've worked in schools across London, where essentially we're down there not because of our practice credentials as architects, but more as our credentials as community and consultation-led practice. And I think that also led to kind of a strong impact in terms of some of the competitions that we've entered. And from times gone by, the Green Homes competition up at Arbourthorne, obviously there was a scheme there that was built by Matthew Lloyd Architects. We still like to think ours is slightly better though. And we continue to write as well. We continue to practice as researchers. Leo, Prue and myself are all part of universities, Prue at Newcastle, Leo and myself at Sheffield. And that remains a very important part of the practice, that all of our design work is impacted by our teaching and research practice. And some of that is about making architecture fun for the users. The project here, Earlham Primary School, it was about taking the worst spaces in a school, school toilets, and making them into something that was sustainable, and made it apparent to the kids the processes that run and operate a building. So the toilets ended up being the worst space in school to the best place in the school. And actually the school had the problem of too many kids wanting to go to these loo, because they could see that by turning on a light, it was generated by electricity from the roof. They could flush the toilets using rainwater and so on. So that sort of sharing that journey with the children became really key part of that project. And then other parts of what we've done over time is look at kind of more larger scale or infrastructural projects, from a sustainable network of power generation at the AMHRC to low carbon timber design at Ecclesall Sawmill site. And obviously amongst the research comes publications, and I think this was a book that we were all really proud of at the time. It's only just out of circulation now. We've got the final few copies from the publishers last year, but really at 10 years old, it was quite an important publication at the time, focusing on the best practice school design around the world. And all of that sort of sits as this lovely little diagram about how practice and research and teaching all come together and inform the way that we work. So that's the perfect diagram. That's probably a little more how it is in terms of research funding is probably more aligned with university and teaching. That's the kind of day-to-day practice. That's how we see the work that we do every day. It's not a clean-cut diagram. It's a messy process, but it's an enjoyable process. So all of that kind of leads us to our approach to Ravine House. Ravine House is a project in Derbyshire, and it was a beautiful building built in 1967. And at the time, it was built to the very best of the materials available to them. It's an incredible house, and when we found it, it was in remarkably good condition. It's just that the technologies that we use to build have changed. And our client's brief was to knock it down and start again, to build it again. But this time, warmer, please. And we want it to look the same. And we looked at it and we were like, why would you knock it down? It's incredible. So we took this and we argued that this building was really important. And so we took the clients on a journey of digging out of the archives that they had all of these really important things. So we had the original plans, and you can see it's this quite sort of geometric plan form centered around the living room at the heart of the building. The blue hatch on the plan at the top was an underfloor heated driveway, and we've got evidence of the clients actually applying to the electricity board to have a substation put in just to power the underfloor heated driveway. So these days we'd look at that and go, oh my God, heating the air, you're crazy. We were really lucky in as far as we had all these incredible documents. And for those of us who suffer the planning rigors of the planning process now, the image on the left is the original planning application. They wrote to the council and said, we'd like to build a house because we need it. And the local planning authority wrote back and said, yes, go ahead. No pictures of what this house might be, no pictures of how big it might be, no plans, elevations, sections, design and access statements, nothing. If only life was that simple now. Other things that were really interesting about this, we started to get a sort of an understanding of the innovation that this project had at the time it was built. So the heating is likely to be underfloor electric. And what we found as we unpeeled the layers of the building was very early electrical underfloor heating, which had long since broken. The windows made to fit the design, but using the latest Pilkington fused double glazed technology. So these are some of the first double glazed windows in the country. It's incredible that we've got this chain of communication. And then the house must be ready for the 1st of May 1967. It was a little bit late, and that was because of the windows. So this is the state of the building that we found. Remarkably good condition. We had a structural survey done. There wasn't a single piece of cracking in the mortar. The roof timbers were fantastic quality, although the roof slates, they were a concrete tile, and they were very much at the end of their life. And you see things that had happened over time, like the timber work had been stained a deep black, but actually underneath that black stain was really good quality timber with very little rot anywhere on the building. So we were faced with a building that was in remarkable condition, to be honest. It also sits in an incredible landscape. So the landscape was planted long before the house was actually built. So it's always sat in this mature landscape. We even had access to the original clients, the original builders' diary for all of the planting. They had an address book with all of the Latin names of the plants listed from beginning to end. And so it provided us this fantastic record of a mid-century garden design as well. And you can see there on the contours on the bottom of the map why we called it Ravine House in the end. So as part of this journey of telling the clients what special building they had, we went back through the archives and we found this building. This is the Alford House by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's one of the last Frank Lloyd Wright houses built, and dates to about 10 years prior to this, 1958. And the plan form has so many similarities. These two wings, this geometric shape, the long overhang roofs, the kind of even down to the kind of the depth of that roof and the chamfered eaves, and the way that that building sits on a plinth in the landscape. And so it became apparent to us that actually this building wasn't something strange within the Derbyshire countryside. It was actually really well informed by architecture that would have been in vogue at the time. So these are some of the photos that we had to work from in terms of a sort of conservation point of view. These were taken for an article for Derbyshire Life magazine. So we had this wonderful record, and actually some of the chairs that you can see in this photo here still exist. They're still in the building. This central space, the double height living room with this wonderful piranha pine ceiling, we decided that whatever we did, you'd never be able to replace that. So we had to protect it at all costs. And then you can see the kind of the garden elevation, the younger planting around the building at this stage. And you can see the way that this building sits onto this kind of stone plinth as the topography shifts down. We're also lucky enough to have original drawings. So there's this fantastic cantilevered corner at the bottom of the building. And looking at that, we were looking and thinking, well, if we had to do this now, how would you do it? And the answer is simply, you'd never get an engineer to sign this off now. So all of this built picture with the client, and this is how we help the client understand how special their project was. And we managed to sort of bring them on board with the idea that this wasn't a new build, it was actually an in-depth conservation build. So we took an audit of everything that around the building that we thought was unique and special. We spent hours and hours finding out where these lamps were from. The lamp on the left is a lamp called the Fibonacci sequence by Fogg and Morrup, which dates to 1966. The wardrobes on the right were actually built by Ponsford's, and on the back of the wardrobe it still has the Ponsford's order number on the back. And then the brickwork we found to a quarry, brickworks down near Leicester, which actually has only just stopped producing bricks, having been sold through various people, including Ibstock. So we had this wonderful trail of information, which led to a sort of very rich knowledge base before we started pulling the building apart. We were very lucky that we had a really good team around. So the client was really heavily engaged. We brought the contractor on at a very early stage. We had an energy consultant, because as the project evolved, we decided it wasn't just about conservation. It was about, if we're going to do this and make the building warmer, how do you do that in the best, most sustainable manner? So we reached out, and actually at this point we started to look at the whole house energy system. And so the consultant was able to advise on ground source, geothermal heating, PVs and MVHR. And then the expertise of the site foreman in terms of their interest and specialist knowledge in terms of building and working with this age of building particularly, but also working on ultra low energy homes, passive houses, etc. So this is where we ended up with the whole house energy system. On the left, not proposed, on the left it was the kind of the initial stab at it. So we were going to remove the gas connection, we were going to have the MVHR system, and we were going to wrap the whole building up a ceiling layer. In the end, what we did was we removed the gas connection, we dug a borehole. The borehole provides both drinking water and heating water. The borehole then returns the excess water to the stream nearby. So we've got a heat pump, underfloor heating, the building's airtight, and we've got an MVHR and solar panels which generate enough electricity to counter the impact of having all of these pumps running almost constantly. And then down the bottom of this page is kind of, these are sketches we were doing in stage 1 work, so really early in the process, working out whether it was achievable to actually retrofit this building and not take away too much space internally. Typical details, you know, it's really hard on a project like this where you're doing retrofit to get all your airtight layers in, particularly where you're wrapping around existing bits of structure, trying to iron out cold bridges, which were, you know, when you didn't really heat the building in the 60s, cold bridge wasn't really a particular issue. But as we were raising the standards throughout the building, we had to be very careful that we weren't going to get these dew points in unexpected places. So the sort of strategy evolved as we moved along. The other part of it was where we were adding to the building, we wanted to make sure that it was a very minimal structure, that we didn't sort of add lots of heavyweight stuff. The client threw us a curveball. They wanted a sunken seating area because that was very 60s/70s. So we ended up with this sort of concrete pit, but coming out of that was this very lightweight steel and timber structure to deal with the kind of extension. So then we begin work on site, and in order to protect that beautiful ceiling in the middle of the building, we had to tent the whole structure. So this is, I think the poor client nearly fell off their chair when they were passed a quote for £55,000 worth of scaffold. But the advantage of this was that we worked throughout all seasons, all weathers, because the building was tented, and essentially all I can equate it to was effectively working inside a factory. We were able to peel back the roof structure and find the original roof timbers were in as good nick as the day they went in. They were perfect. There was no rot anywhere. And in having this tent, we were able to protect those, which then meant that we could take our time thinking about details, thinking about how we were going to layer up the building, where the breather membrane was going to go, and how that was going to work as you went, whether we put it in underneath or whether we put it in over the top of the joists. And that was not an easy decision, because obviously where we were protecting the roof, everywhere else we made the decision to go underneath the roof. Where we were protecting this roof, we had no choice but to go on top of it. So then it was making sure that we had continuity between these layers, between this change of approach between underneath and on top. And then also trying to work out very carefully what the impact on the eaves of adding in an extra layer of 100 mil of insulation. We explored all types of insulation as well. We looked at kind of low carbon insulations, but ultimately, because we're working on a conservation project, we had to draw a line and go with the thinnest but highest performance insulation that we could use. And so these are sort of some of the kind of results of that. So you can see the airtight membranes are all internally installed through the main building, all taped and joined to the wall structure. So we've got no breaks in that. We've got the solar panels being set into the slate And then we've restored the copper cupola that was originally there. And you get little clues to that the building has changed. Previously, the window had been a very surface window, but actually we pushed the window really deep into the reveal to give it a bit of solar shading from the south facade. And again, this is the extension. This is looking at water control. It's looking at air movement and vapor control. And again, incredibly difficult set of parameters where you're working with the structure, with the windows, trying to get the insulation to be as high as we could, but without necessarily compromising other parts of that structure. And we also were really lucky enough to work with some fantastic tradespeople. So all the while we were doing this roofing, it was in the middle of COVID by this point, and the copper roofer was very happy to be on site on their own and just working away, which then meant that we could go up and we could actually work with him in real time and refining the details to make sure that where we had integration of roof lights, where we had the integration with the existing building, everything just came together in the way that we wanted. So COVID actually lent us a favour in a way where we could slow the process up and work at a kind of pace with the craftspeople. Moisture is the bane of all of our lives, I think it's fair to say. So we had to sort of work out in an area where there's quite a high clay base what we were going to do in terms of moisture control for the sunken conversation pit. Also, we came back after Christmas, the Christmas recess, to find to our horror that the roof over the central space had a whole load of surface moisture on it. And what we discovered in the end was that in the run up to Christmas, we'd plastered out the first few rooms, and the moisture from the plaster when the building was all shut up over Christmas was enough just to put a layer of damp and condensation onto the roof, which had then turned to mold. Fortunately, very simple to rectify, but a moment of horror as we walked on site post close down. I think, again, coming back to the whole house energy approach, the theoretical diagram versus reality, underfloor heating pipes going in at slightly closer proximity because they're running at a constant but lower temperature to deal with the ground source heat pump, digging a 50-foot borehole, actually a 60-foot borehole, into the ground, not particularly deep, but deep enough, and then making sure that we're working with the solar installers, the joiners and the roofers to make sure that the roof is as unobtrusive as possible, and then dealing with the MVHR in and out. Unfortunately for us, the energy consultant changed their mind as to where the vents were going to go too late in the day, so we'd already slated the roof, and whereas we perhaps wanted to go through the roof, they've actually come out through the soffit of the building. I think this is one of the kind of big takeaways from the project is, in order to do this, the amount of servicing you need in a building is massive, totally disproportionate to how we think of servicing in a normal house, where maybe you've got a little boiler, maybe you've got a water cylinder, pressurized water cylinder. Actually, with this, you know, we had a big space for the water pump, we had a big space for the manifolds, we had a big space for the MVHR, and obviously in a project like this, you've got that space, but it does sort of make you consider how we do this for smaller buildings. As with all projects, the clients usually throw you a couple of curveballs. One for us was how do you make an airtight chimney? We weren't given one airtight chimney, we were given two. And the answer is it's really, really difficult. we spent hours on site with the joiners, the fire installers. You have to have a very specific type of stove. And then we had to have certain types of lining in order to get around proximity to heat, proximity to the fire. So all of this really good, really interesting, and quite steep learning curve in many ways, requiring hours and hours of going back and forth on these drawings. But in the end, it worked. And as you can see here, different types of drawings for different parts of the project. So this was really one where we were trying to explain to all of the people on site where each layer was going to go and how you achieve that kind of airtightness using standard products, but also observing all the safety regulations that you have to have. So that brings us towards the sort of the end of this really, and this is kind of revealing some of the details. You know, the ceiling, we've got exactly the same lamps has gone in. The ceiling has been preserved. The windows, the proportion of the windows we've taken from the original building. We've removed a few glazing bars because glass is bigger now, or rather can be bigger now. We've corrected on the picture on the left, looking up at the top of the ceiling, we've corrected one of the things that annoyed me the most. The steel beams coming into the wooden ceiling were off center. So with a clever bit of overboarding with plaster, we've managed to correct that. Careful work with between the copper roofers and the slate roofers meant that we get these really immaculate details where you have absolute perfection where it comes to the air gap below the copper and above the slate. It was just lovely to work with a team that actually cared. And to all intents and purposes, we've met the client's brief. I want you to build the building. I want it to look the same, but I want it to be warmer. And I think in a way, this building's gone so much further. There are a lot of people that the client knew who knew this building from before, and they come and go, so what have you had done? And then they go, oh, that's what you've done. So we've gone and taken a building that was built to the best of its ability in 1967 and added layers of the best practice that we can achieve now. So this has got really high level triple glazed windows. It's all airtight. It's instead of being a high electricity consuming building, it now has its own water source. It now has no gas supply. It's got PVs to reduce that energy consumption. It's really well insulated so that the temperature can run at a lower, the heating can run at a lower temperature. But all of this is dressed in the same building that we found. And really what we've done is we've just sort of amped up some of those original details. And then where we've added new things, it's done to the best of what we can do now. So the light fittings are the best of what we have now. The way that we've dealt with light coming into the building through roof lights, again, is all about this kind of story of light from the original building. And reading the original brief, just returning to that, the client of the original build said that he wanted to have at least 2 views of the garden from every room. And again, we've kind of kept to that in the building as well. Particularly from the kitchen, you actually get to see 5 aspects of the garden. So where does that leave us? I think it's really important that one of the questions that the Stephen Lawrence jury asked us is it okay just to do nice work for people with some money? And it's like, well, that's architecture. We have to do it. We enjoy doing it. But it's kind of what you learn from that and what you take away from that. And I think one of the projects that we worked on almost simultaneously, but slightly after we'd done a lot of the learning, was this project for George Clark on Ugly House to Lovely House. We didn't really want to do the second program. We'd done one before and we thought, well, we've done that. But we went into it partly because we knew the people that it was for. We went into it as well with a series of writers, and we said, well, we want to talk about sustainability on TV, on primetime TV. And to our horror, they went, nobody's ever done that before on one of their George Clark programs. We thought this was a terrible thing. So actually, we looked at how we could take those lessons of really well building this, wrapping it in a new layer of skin and insulation, and trying to take some of those lessons learned from a big scale and repeat them at small scale. This has now led to a lot of the work that we're doing for South Yorkshire Housing Association at the minute. They're looking to decarbonise their housing stock by 2035. It's a massive program of taking these ideas that you play around with, you experiment with on a large scale, on a kind of a one-off project, and then try and roll them out. So that's very much sort of the project. That's where we've come from, where we're going to, and yeah, that's Ravine House. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you so much. That was a really thorough presentation. No, it's such an insightful presentation. I really love all of your projects, so not just this project, but I was thinking back to Artemis Barn as well. I love how textural they are, but with Ravine House, it's a really impressive retrofit project, especially going from, I didn't realize it had a heated driveway, so going from that to what it is now. But yeah, I guess what tops it as well is when you said that you realized it was in a structurally good condition. So I guess that you've got a bit more budget to use elsewhere, but the detailing with the copper and slate, I love that image. It was amazing. It's quite heartwarming. But yeah, so what are your questions for Howard, and any comments that you do have as well? Please write them in the comment box, and we'll pass them on. So obviously it's quite a large project, this, so not just an extension, but an extension and retrofit. What was the relationship between you and the contractor, and at what stage did you approach the contractor? Because you said you started to work on detail sketches at stage 1, and also did the contractor impact the project as well?
I think we, when we first went to the house, we kind of knew who we wanted to use to build it, because they're just deeply passionate about mid-century architecture, and also they're really good at low energy architecture. So I think very early on in the conversation, probably as we were kind of getting towards, well, even before planning, actually, we'd introduced the contractor, we brought them along, yeah, it was it was very beneficial to have that kind of knowledge and expertise early on in the project. So what was the budget? Confidential.
Okay. But did they I was going to say, did they impact the project in any way as well?
Yeah, I think we were able to work with them at an early stage to ask about things like air test, and I think also to look at different types of insulation with them, so that we could work out where we were going to go with the U values even before we were going to planning. And I think that was something that was yeah, really important to understanding then what we were going to add to the project. But it was a conversation that evolved all the way through. So, you know, we kind of knew the thicknesses of what we wanted to do, but as I said in the talk, it was kind of where we put the breather membranes we were still messing around with on site. You know, and we would do a test here and we would do a test there to see, does the theory match up with the practicality of actually installing it? And one of the contractors was like, no, let's put the whole thing on top. And so they tested it, and then they were like, oh no, that was really hard, let's go underneath. So you know, it's just lovely to have a really open conversation.
Yeah, I can imagine it makes it easier as well. When you had the scaffold put up, so you said that gave you a bit more time to refine details. I'm just curious, what did change at that point, or was it justified any design decisions that you had made previously?
I think one of the hardest things is if you look at the edge detail of that roof.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you can make it out on your screens. It's kind of 3 cedar boards high. Actually, it's 3.5, and we had to add half. We spent a long time working out if we raised the slate and if we raised the roof to put more insulation on top of the roof joists, then we were going to have to raise the edge of the gutter, because otherwise the rainwater would come off. And we spent a long time arguing the toss, because that was quite a significant cost extra to the client, because we were going to have to go and get new cedar, and it was going to take time and cost money for the joiners to do it. And then we're going to have to work out a new way of capping the gutter so that you saw this kind of beautiful edge detail. Yeah, that took several weeks to work it all out. And, you know, usually when you're on a project like this, you just get on with it, because time is money. But on that instance, it was so important. We were going to change the aesthetic of the building detrimentally if we got it wrong.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Somebody's just asked, how straightforward was the planning process?
I guess I didn't mention the planning process because the planners weren't interested. So this building is in Greenbelt. It's yeah, on the edge of a conservation area, although not in a conservation area, but it came under, because you can't see it from the road, there was no comment. And actually we sailed through planning. You know, there we are putting this ridiculous geometric copper box on the back of a really lovely 1960s house. We were expecting loads of kickback. Actually, it was dead easy. It was the easiest bit of the whole thing, really was.
That's so lucky.
Oh, it was, yeah,
That's
really,
quite
really, really weird. So, but yeah.
Yeah. So you did part of the work, did you say during COVID? You continued through COVID. How did that change how you worked? Is there anything that you changed during COVID that you've actually taken forward in practice?
I think having sort of hybrid meetings with clients, you know, realizing that not every meeting has to be face to face, where probably more so with consultants than actually clients. I think there's still a benefit to having face to face with clients. But also the realization that sometimes you can just give each other a call and talk about a drawing online and just say, what about this detail, rather than thinking, oh, I've got to go out to them, they've got to then be there. So I think sort of shortcutting and having more conversations rather than less, but quicker because they're online. I think in terms of, we were able to continue working almost all the way through. It was really frustrating and problematic, as I'm sure most people here will recognise. It was particularly those first few months where it was really difficult. You know, are we going to be arrested by Derbyshire police for leaving Sheffield? You know, none of that happened. It was easy. We had a good sort of, we'd have been finished 4 months earlier, I think, was the general gist of the impact of COVID on the project. And it would have been a hell of a lot cheaper because, you know, costs for everything rose right at a critical point in the project. So I think that's the kind of big change. But actually day-to-day practice, yeah, just recognizing the ease of communication of stuff like this.
So I've got 2 more questions. So were the clients pleased? Yes.
The clients are delighted, and actually seeing them talk to the Stephen Lawrence jury a couple of weeks back and describe the house to the Stephen Lawrence jury was really lovely, actually, and just see the pride with which they love living in their own home, actually. And you know, one of our clients actually grew up there as a young girl and just remembered it being horribly cold and hating it. And now it's gone to this place where it's just always really beautiful and just has a kind of constant temperature. I know there's a question from Paula about, does it overheat in the summer? No, this house is almost constant throughout the year, and that's pretty incredible, actually.
And how much post-occupancy evaluation are you managing to do on the house, energy consumption, etc.?
Yes, so we've got access to all of the client's solar data. We've been working with them to work out a way to sort of monitor their electricity consumption. I think, in all honesty, there's 2 problems. So I think the energy consumption is slightly higher than we thought, but actually that's partly to do with getting used to running the systems. So the way that the heat pump was set up was to run at some ridiculous temperature. And so actually, as we've reduced that, that's reduced the bills. And I think that's a kind of crucial thing, actually, is with all of these slightly different, not standard boiler systems, a lot of people, including us as architects, I think, need to recalibrate how we heat the homes and how we use those systems to reduce the energy bills. And then the other one that really surprised us was the borehole gummed up within 12 months. And it gummed up because of bacterial, it's like frog spawn. It was like this bacterial jelly that gummed up the pump system, really horrible. So now we've had to put in a test filter before it goes through all the filters of the system, so that the client can test more regularly to make sure that that bacterial buildup doesn't happen again.
Okay. I whiz through these because I've just noticed we've only got 4 minutes left and it's going too short. But Andrew's asking, what was used to determine the predicted energy use and performance?
We didn't actually, because we weren't going for a kind of energy project at the start of it. We never really did those kind of pre-calcs. I think we would have loved to have done it with hindsight, but actually at the time we were going for a sort of a much more vanilla retrofit, and it was only as the project evolved that we kind of found we were doing all this stuff.
Ada asks, just wondering, what is the form factor and how much additional insulation in the walls and roofs needed to be installed?
Sorry, I don't keep that one at the forefront of my head. I'd have to dig back through the notes. Sorry.
That's okay. You're quite rich in architectural staff in your practice, so how much do you think that influenced as well? Or in general, how does it influence your projects?
Sorry, what was the start of the question?
So you're quite rich in architecture. So most of the staff in your practice are also staff in architectural schools.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I believe
now, yeah, we've sort of been joking about this really. We've kind of grown, and it's caught us a bit by surprise over the last year or so. So I think we're now sort of about 50-50 academia to practice. I think it just engenders this idea, and that's what I was talking about at the start. We still see everything we do as a bit of research. We're kind of always looking for the wider lessons to take out of the project. We're always looking at kind of when you go into conservation, what's the research? Where did this building come from? Where does it, what's important about this place? So I suppose it's that sort of line of inquiry. And then I think also the kind of teaching practice that actually we find we quite often take those teaching practices into helping clients understand their project and their buildings better.
So Justin asks, one of the trickiest bits is how to insulate beneath an existing structure. Did you have to dig out everything on the floors and around the structural supports to get this retrofitted?
No, so what we were really lucky actually. It had 2 layers of concrete screed in, so we took out both of those concrete screeds. So we were able to use a thinner screed to go back in, and so that meant that we could get a layer of insulation in instead of one of the other layers of screed.
I was lucky, and I'm just conscious of the time. In terms of benefit and retrofit, is that something that you see you will take a kind of go along that route in the future, or is it just as a project comes?
I think it's really important. I think, in order to understand both Enefit and Passive House, you've got to understand what those systems are offering. And so I think, we've done a lot of training on all of that. I don't think we ever use the system because we've never really been asked to by the clients, but pretty much every project we do adopts all the principles that you would find in Enefit and Passive House.
And in terms of architectural, so last question, unless anybody's got a question, we've got like a few minutes. But in terms of architectural responsibility, when you said that you suggested a sustainable project on Ugly House to Lovely House, that they were surprised by that. So in terms of, and then it refers back to right at the start, you talking about social engineering as well, that when you move down the residential route, it impacts people, how you design things. So how do you take that architectural responsibility into smaller projects, residential projects? I'm just thinking of when you spoke about the mechanical heat recovery, it is huge. And then when you think of a standard terraced house, we're talking about quite a lot of space consumed by that. So what do you think you could move into that and just kind of stick to the architectural duties and try to bring sustainable ideas into projects?
I think what we were trying to do with the Ugly House to Lovely House project was actually show that you can't necessarily fit all of this big tech in. So you've really got to go back to what I started the lecture with, which is fabric first. Actually these days it means a shed load of insulation. And actually, if you can reduce the energy needs of that building, then we can seriously reduce the energy demands overall. And actually, with a project like that, we realized that we were going to envelop 3/4 of that building. So rather than building to kind of extension standards, we were building to kind of beyond new build standards with our U values. And it was kind of taking those U values and treating the building as beyond a new build. you know, to go beyond building regs, new build standards, and yeah, basically build the warmest building we could that's going to protect it against overheating. Some of the kind of ideas of the ventilation, you know, the 3-story stairwell was about providing a sort of an air chimney through the building so that it doesn't overheat during the hottest days. So basically trying to deal with a lot of this stuff passively rather than actually having to have the bells and whistles.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then in terms of, because you said you did competition entries at the start as well, what alternatives do you see to investor-led projects? Do competitions help in that, or what do you envisage for the future? Alternatives.
I think it's really difficult. I mean, we get very frustrated with this kind of, you know, you've got to have track record in delivering a certain type of building before you can deliver that certain type of building. And we come against that all the time. It's like, you know, you get invited to go on a list for something and they go, yeah, give us five previous examples of that type of building. You're like, well, why did you bother inviting me? Because we can't. So it's quite difficult to jump out of that mold. And I think that's where competitions offer you that kind of that route out of that avenue. But then they're quite a lot of work. And actually, to be honest, we haven't done a competition for about 4 years now. And we've been that flat out, that busy, that we haven't actually had time to invest in that. But the other thing I think that's really important to us, you know, we were really pleased to get onto the South Yorkshire housing framework. And I think that just goes back to our practice origins, you know, as a sort of social endeavour. And I think that kind of community-led architecture remains something we're deeply passionate about. And actually, one of the things I was really pleased in a kind of weird way was, you know, on Thursday we didn't win the Stephen Lawrence project because we lost it to an absolutely fantastic community building. And you can't say fairer than that. You know, that prize should never have a posh house on it. It should always be about the biggest impact to the biggest group of people who don't usually have access to kind of, I don't know, what do we call it? Posh architecture? I don't know.
Lovely spaces.
Yeah, you know, architecture should be for all of us. And, you know, I think that kind of, we really feel strongly about that as a practice.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. So unfortunately, we've run out of time, and thank you so much to Howard and everyone at CE+CA as well for sharing your practice with us and sharing Ravine House. Good luck on the Longlist House of the Year award. But as a way of showing our appreciation and gratitude, we wanted to gift a charity of your choice for £250. So do you have a charity in mind?
I forgot to ask the team today, but yes, I will. Can I email you that? But no, that's an incredibly generous thing, and yeah, we will. That's wonderful.
Thank you. No, yeah, of course, I'll send you an email as well about that. So there's quite a few people who are writing, thank you very much, thanks. Really inspiring, thanks, looks great, thank you, great presentation. I'll let you read through them all. But yeah, thank you as well to Ruben from the RIBA for all of your help as well in this event, and thank you everybody else for attending. Hope you enjoyed it, have a great evening, and that you can join us at another SSA event. So thank you, take care.
Thank you.